Good morning. Yeah, you're welcome to the Sunday paper review here on Off the Ball. Neil Treacy filling in for Joe Malloy this afternoon. We're streaming live at the moment on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter and Periscope. We've a big show coming up on from 1 o'clock on News Talk. We'll have commentary from Manchester United against Liverpool with Nathan Murphy and with Kevin Kilban. And we'll also have Mike Ruddock joining us in studio to talk us through Ireland against Italy and react to last night's great win for Wales. Joining me today on the paper review is Kieran Cunningham, Chief Sports Writer for the Irish Daily Star. How are you, Kieran?
I'm good, thanks.
And Niall Kelly of The42.ie. Welcome aboard, Niall.
Thanks very much, Neil.
Good stuff, guys. We'll fly through the headlines to start with. Sunday Times are leading with a picture of Josh Adams and Liam Williams celebrating last night after Adams's late try to pretty much confirm Wales' win against England. Wales fight back from 10-3 down to beat England and shatter their slam hopes. Grand illusion is the headline. While also there on the side you can see grounds opened up for non-GAA events. Michael Foley writing from yesterday's Congress in Wexford. 14 years since Croke Park was first opened to other sports. Delegates at GAA Annual Congress in Wexford yesterday made major GAA grounds available in exceptional circumstances for non-GAA events, with 91% agreeing to make the change. On the front page of the Sunday Independent Sports Supplement, it is a picture of Dublin's Cormac Costello celebrating after scoring his side's goal in the league win against Mayo at Croke Park last night. And the headline reads, Mayo deficiencies laid bare by Dublin's show of strength. And then on the side as well, the other big story emerging from Congress yesterday, Donegal fail in bid to oust Blues from Croke Park. Dublin's case to get Dublin out of Croke Park for a Super 8s game was emphatically defeated yesterday at Congress. And also there at the bottom, Murphy keen to capitalise on a big opportunity. Jordy Murphy starting today for Ireland against Italy in Rome. On the back page of the Mail on Sunday, Dubs Croker Cruise champions slap down Mayo's weak resistance. Dublin at 112, Mayo 7 points was the score last night in Croke Park. And also there at the bottom, a picture of Paul Pogba set up for a fall. Guardiola says talk of 4 trophies does not help City ahead of Cup final. They're playing Chelsea in the League Cup final, and then Pogba as well. Pogba does himself no favours, but is still a leader. On the back page, next up is the Star, Star on Sunday. It's time to fight for title again. Only Prem Crowns Gunners satisfy Ollie. That's ahead of Manchester United and Liverpool this afternoon. And this is the one, Wembley win top of Pep's wish list. Manchester City boss Pep Guardiola insists today's Carabao Cup final is the biggest game of the season. I don't really know how many people are agreeing with that one. Not sure where Guardiola came to that conclusion. On the Sun, don't cry for me, RG Screamer. Bust up, Poch, sorry. Mauricio Pochettino was absolutely furious with Mike Dean yesterday after Spurs' 2-1 defeat against Burnley, and is certainly going to be facing some sort of punishment from the FA after it. And also squeaky gun time. This really is Super Sunday. Solskjaer Klopp boys are feeling the heat. That's ahead of Manchester United and Liverpool at 2:05, which we'll have commentary of this afternoon on Off the Ball. The Mirror are also leading with Manchester United against Liverpool. Red Rag, Fergie, Ollie's been impressive. United should give him the boss's job now. Sir Alex Ferguson would give Ole Gunnar Solskjaer the Manchester United job now, which probably means he is going to get the job if Alex Ferguson is suggesting it. While Solskjaer says it is not our way to wait so long for a title. Kop are feeling the pressure. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer insists that Manchester United could never wait 29 years for a Premier League title like their bitter rivals Liverpool. And finally, before we get into the thick of it, back at the Sunday World, give it to Solskjaer. Ollie, don't let Liverpool catch up on United's title record. That's going as well with the news that Alex Ferguson says to give the Manchester United job permanently to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. So, Kieran, Niall, that's the back pages. We're going to start, I think, with there probably isn't much in the papers coming out of Congress yesterday, but the two stories probably are worth talking about. First of all, the Donegal's motion being defeated to get Dublin out of Croke Park for another Super 8s game, and further GAA grounds being opened. Probably going to start, though, with Donegal's motion being defeated.
Yeah, well, you'd first wonder why was it Donegal that brought this, and I think that's pretty clear. Like, if you go back to last year's Super 8s, Donegal were the only county that had played 2 away games, so that put them in the back foot straight away, because the first game was against Dublin. They ended up having to go down to a do-or-die game against Tyrone, which they lost. So they bowed out at that stage, and they felt that was unfair. And I think you can't really argue there was fair. But the Donegal's problem was they phrased this motion wrongly. Because they focused on Dublin's, without naming Dublin, on Dublin's home game and wanting, effectively, they're looking for them to move their home game to Parnell Park, and that is not feasible when you have a population of 1.4 million to play in a ground that's around 10,000 or less capacity. But they should, but there is a strong argument that you come up with a system where Dublin have one home game in Croke Park, which is effectively their home ground now, one away game, and one in a neutral venue in the Super 8s. Because the argument has been made, nobody was mentioning this kind of stuff when Dublin weren't winning or in the noughties or whatever. But the Super 8s wasn't there then. This is a new series, and a round-robin series, you have to treat everybody equally. And there's been a huge reaction to this. There's a lot of anger out there that people, rightly or wrongly, a lot of people think the GAA is enthralled to Dublin. And even Tom Ryan, the Director General, in an interview a few weeks ago, he did make it clear that Dublin is one of the main fuelers of the GAA in financial terms, that they depend very heavily on Dublin. So for that reason, I'm not sure if that another motion, a different kind of motion would have got approval anyway. I actually have experience of Congress, strangely enough, in another life. I was living in London, and I was asked to edit a magazine to mark 100 years of London GAA. And part of that centenary celebration was they hosted Congress in the Royal Lancaster Hotel, but they were way off schedule and they're way behind terms. So I was co-opted onto the organising committee because I had a bit of experience in event management. And it does kind of open your eyes to what Congress is. There's this illusion that is really democratic, that emotions come, any club can put forward a motion, it ends up in Congress. But the powers that be really call the shots. They put the pressure on for the things they want to get passed. It's interesting that if you look at yesterday's motions, I think 70% of them actually came from the top table. The ones that came from clubs, they were all either defeated, nearly all were either defeated or ruled out of order. That it's really, this is just an illusion there. Basically, the top table decides what happens. And the top table didn't want this motion going through, and the pressure was put on. It was a flawed motion anyway, but the thinking behind it, I think, was right, that some change has to happen to the Super 8s because it's weighted too heavily in favour of Dublin now, and it's like gerrymandering in politics. That I think it's really hard to see a scenario where Dublin don't reach the All-Ireland semi-finals in a year because of this current situation.
I'd love to know, when you look at any of the major kind of political issues in politics itself, in the sphere of politics, you often get opinion polls, or you also often get tracking polls covering them for weeks or months leading up to a vote itself. And I'd be particularly interested to know what the mood around this motion was before the most recent GAA accounts were released, which showed that the Football Championship, the attendances, there was a precipitous drop in attendances down to from 19,000 to around 13,000, and the revenue in the Football Championship dropped by nearly 4 million. And I wonder, had those figures not been so stark in the first season of the Super 8s, would there have been a greater groundswell of support for this kind of motion?
That's very possible, because you do look people would question a lot of counties, say, why are they back in Dublin? Why haven't they backed Donegal? But a lot of those counties, they're looking for grants from Croke Park for various projects on the go, and Dublin does fuel a lot of those grants. So to them, they're looking at the bottom line, I think. That's and a lot of them counties don't have much hope of being the Super 8s anyway. But they're thinking.
So what are they going to benefit out of?
They're thinking maximum. But it's interesting, if you look through the figures in Jim Gavin's time as Dublin manager, because you can't really judge the championship because they only played a couple of games outside Croke Park. But in league games, they've won their away league games by an average of 3 points apiece. They've won their games in Croke Park by an average 8 points apiece. There's a 5-point differential. Croke Park is significant for Dublin. It's inarguable. It really helps them.
I'm not privy to the Donegal, the inner workings of the Donegal board and why they chose to bring the motion the way they brought it. But you do wonder, kind of touching on what you said, would it have been better? Super 8s as laid out, the format as laid out is home, away and Croke Park. Would they have had more success in lobbying for home, away, neutral? And yes, that wouldn't have guaranteed necessarily, they wouldn't have had it enshrined in law that Dublin have to come out of Croke Park. But I think that even the most hard-headed Dublin fan will admit now that Croke Park has de facto been their home ground, and if the obligation is to play a neutral game, well then yes. If that's what's enshrined in law, then yes, Dublin will realistically have to look at taking it outside Croke Park. I think, as Kieran touched on earlier, the assumption there is from a lot of fans, a lot of casual supporters, is that the right to a neutral game is already enshrined in the Super 8 format, which it's not. And I think Donegal probably would have had more success in bringing that to
I think that's beyond dispute. Like, I'm actually surprised that nobody intervened at some stage and said, hold on, you phrased this wrong. There's a different way of going at it.
Do you think the phrasing would have changed it much? Like, it was a fairly overwhelming majority that
I still think Croke Park, because the other thing is, like, your corporate boxes in Croke Park as well. You know, so I think there is financial pressure then, because they have sold, and people will be buying, a lot of those clients will be buying corporate boxes on the basis that, you know, there's a couple of, a lot of big games in Dublin and or involving Dublin in the Super 8, because the Leinster Championship games aren't that attractive to corporate clients anymore. So
we are still only talking about one game at the end of the day here. I mean, I don't know if.
But in a 3-game series, one game is significant. Like, it's interesting last year that 4 teams that lost on the opening day of the Super 8s all went out. None of them progressed. Like, and when you've only 3 games of round robin, it makes a massive difference, I think. So,
would you be considering then when you're actually playing the Croke Park game? First, second, or third?
That's definitely, I think, should. That should be tweaked. Definitely, I think you should look at definitely not going first. But the neutral thing is interesting, because I don't know how much it would affect them financially. Like, if you had Dublin Kerry in Semple Stadium, you're still going to get 50,000. So you're still going to get a lot of money out of it, and like, the Dubs would love to go. Like, we saw that in 2001. Like, there's a train link. Like, it's straightforward.
Even last season in Omagh, I mean, there was a huge away support went up to Omagh, and it probably was the best test Dublin had.
But Park O'Keefe, like, there's a lot of big grounds now that you could get 50,000 in.
And as much as there are a lot of Dublin fans, that don't want to be moved out of Croke Park, when they have been forced to travel, they've travelled in numbers. They were like they genuinely have. It's not like the fans don't want to have to.
Yeah, and it's not like, I think a lot of the language around of it has been misguided. Like, I think John Costello shouldn't have been saying stuff about divisive and mean-spirited and stuff. Like, if Dublin were in that position where they were forced to play 2-way games last year, he might have been annoyed and brought emotion. Like, Donegal were misguided in the sense that the way they phrased the motion, but to say it was divisive or mean-spirited, I think, was wrong. And this is a problem around Congress and around the GAA. The language used is very loose. Like, even on Friday night, a delegate from Offaly brought up the Liam Miller thing again. The row around the Liam Miller testimonial. And Tom Ryan did in his Director General's report as well a few weeks ago. They should be thinking about Liam Miller's family every time that's brought up. Like, have a bit of cop on. Like, move on from that, But it's not going to go away, because there is a lot of disquiet about people, rightly or wrongly, feel Dublin are handed too many advantages in terms of funding, in terms of Croke Park, etc. And I do feel sympathy for the Dublin players and the Dublin management, because I think they're an incredible bunch and a really admirable bunch and very interesting people and an amazing football team. But a lot of these decisions are being taken by the GAA. It's not a Dublin problem. It's because of Dublin is so strong in an inter-county system. You have one county that's roughly third of the population now. But the questions to be asked at Dublin at county board level as well. Like, Leitrim now, everybody brings up Leitrim, where Leitrim are. Like, Leitrim are doing brilliantly in Division 4, but they have a tiny population, about 36,000. But they developed a ground now with a capacity of 18,000. They've developed a centre of excellence and training pitches and gyms, etc. And they put in the fundraising and do that. Like, what have Dublin actually done? Like, Dublin have Parnell Park, which is much the same as it's been for 20 years. There's no great training complex out there. Like, they have sometimes use Abbottstown, they use various club pitches. Like, a lot of stuff has been there's a lot of disquiet around the country that the counties who've had to raise a huge amount of money to create local facilities. I see it in Donegal. They're looking for 3 million for a centre of excellence, but they were in big debt after last year. They spent over $1 million on their teams, and Dublin don't have those kind of bills because they don't have travelling expenses, which a lot of Dublin supporters forget. Like counties like Dublin, Mayo have huge travelling expenses with players every year.
Is building a smaller stadium in Dublin viable, or
well, they have looked at this in the Spa Well
to make it a bit better?
Yeah, but they were very keen on the Spa Well project, which didn't happen. So, that is part of the Dublin long-term plan. And I think they need a 25,000 capacity stadium.
Yeah,
in Dublin.
Is it worth doing though? Because the argument has been put forward that why are we building a new stadium when we have Croke Park here on our doorstep, and this other ground might only be used a handful of times a year?
Croke Park, when it's half empty, is a horrible place.
You only have to look at last night. Like you were there, Kieran, and you said earlier outside that it was dead.
Yeah, there were just over 35,000 people, which is a big crowd for a league game. But you could
at any other ground.
Yeah, but you could hear
atmosphere.
what James Horan was calling to his players because it was so quiet. It was dead. It was completely flat, and we've all been at a load of games like that. Even in summer now, for most games in Croke Park, the upper tiers aren't open. Yeah. And when that happens, there's no atmosphere.
When you compare it to the atmosphere in Tralee a couple of weeks ago, when you couldn't get into the ground for love nor money because it was sold out a week in advance.
And I actually love going to Purnell Park for the Dublin hurlers because it's packed to the rafters. Yeah. And it's only it's a small crowd in numbers, but it makes a lot of noise and it's a really good febrile atmosphere. So I think you need a ground capacity 25,000, 30,000 for a city of Dublin's population. I think you need their own ground, that you use for league games, use for some Leinster Championship games, and it'll pay for it, and club championship games.
Speaking of club championship, actually, that was one thing that came up yesterday. John Horan mentioned the prospect that he wants to play the All Ireland finals, club finals in January going forward. Try condense the season.
Is it dry stuff to get Guidor to put the boombox away a bit earlier?
Is that viable though?
Well, I personally think, and it's a point that's been made a lot of times in recent weeks, I think that unfortunately the structure of the club championships means that by the time the semi-finals roll around in mid-February, it loses all of the impetus. And yes, it's wonderful that teams, that a club like Guidor, who have something momentous to celebrate, at least have the time and space to go and celebrate that without having to focus on getting straight back to training on Monday morning because you have an All-Ireland semi-final 2 weeks later. But at the same time, the momentum is lost, and they were two really intriguing matchups last weekend between Corofin and Guidor, and I kind of felt even the Mullinachta story was such a fairy tale, and it kind of had the national attention before Christmas. And yes, it was a kind of a lopsided fixture last weekend because they're coming up against a club as prestigious and illustrious as Croke's, but it kind of felt by the time the game came around last weekend that Mullinachta, they said that story is still ongoing. All the momentum of it had kind of...
And last week even was an incredibly quiet weekend across the sporting world even. And, those two games struggled to really grab the attention.
Well, I think they struggle because the club championships are very interesting in that before Christmas they get a huge amount of coverage. Yeah. There's a lot of features, there's a lot of stuff on radio and TV, etc., and online. But once the leagues start, they really slip down the pecking order because the inter-county game is such a huge beast. And also the Six Nations is kicking in and the Premier League title race is hotting up and the Champions League is starting up again. So before Christmas, it's got more... there's just more scope to do stuff. And
you've been with the storylines for the previous 6 weeks or 2 months.
Yeah, and if you look at the time frame, Neil, it is ridiculous. The gap between Guidor winning or Mullinachta winning or stuff or whatever and last week's semi-final is equivalent to, say, a Premier League season ending and a new one starting. It was just crazy. All the impetus and all the momentum is gone. And also, it creates a problem for those teams as well. In a couple of weeks' time, they're back into their club championships. They're given, it's very striking how often teams who've won at provincial level or All Ireland level are then beaten very early in the defence of their club championship at county level because they're just asked. They're given no break at all.
There was an interesting conversation last week or the week before, I believe it was on the GAA hour, and they were discussing the possibility of having the All Ireland club championships played in December, and a point that probably isn't given enough airtime is how amazing would that be, given the amount of emigration from Ireland in the last few years, how amazing would that be to have your club in an All-Ireland final being played kind of the third week in December, just before Christmas, and that as kind of the linchpin of part of your reason to come home, communities that have been shorn of a lot of their young people in the last 10 to 15 years, and then these people coming home because the club is still so central to their identity. And I mean, there are definite opportunities there for the GAA. I'm not really sure that moving it to January it changes anything. I think, get it done in the year, get it done in the calendar year, as many people have proposed.
There is certainly, though, a lot to be done before you could even get to the point where you're playing the All-Ireland final in late December or early January or something like that, because the entire calendar itself is a mess to begin with.
Yeah, well, you look at the Dublin Championship doesn't start till they play rounds. They play a round in April, but it doesn't effectively start till the autumn. So to complete the Dublin Championship, the Leinster Championship, and the All-Ireland Series by December would be very, very difficult.
And then you have almost every county is doing their own. They have their own format. They might have a round robin, it might be a straight knockout, it might be X, Y, or Z.
The only way around it is if you have a centralised calendar, and every county is handed, this is a schedule for your club championship. This is the format you take, and you all play games at these weekends, no matter what your county commitments. But I cannot see that ever happening. So.
And the other bit from Congress, before we move on from it, was probably the good news from Congress yesterday. GAA grounds around the country are going to be available in certain circumstances to sports.
Yeah, I don't think it's any great surprise because, once the decision was made when Lansdowne Road was redeveloped to open up Croke Park, I think this was inevitable. This was a matter of time. And it does open up the possibility of hosting something interesting down the line, like, say, a European Under-21 Championships in soccer, or... do we resurrect the Rugby World Cup or whatever? But even things like Munster are playing Leinster in a big European Cup game, if they played that in Park O'Keefe or the Gaelic grounds or whatever.
It shows up.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll be letting rugby players onto that pitch when they're
Not for a while.
But it's good to see it. It'd be interesting to see how it pans out, like who's going to use it and when, and like say Cork City if they get a big Europa League fixture, if they look to use the park or something, so
it's definitely a progressive step. And I don't think the fear, I guess, from the GAA traditionalists was that once you rubber stamp one, you rubber stamp all, and I don't think that's going to be the case. I think the way this motion has been phrased and the way it has been brought is that everything will be treated on a case by case basis in the national interest and in the GAA interest. And I think it's a progressive step. It might not be before its time, but it's certainly a progressive step.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned there, the GAA's interest, I think part of it is very much financially motivated because attendances are down. The GAA Championships, they have been down significantly. So I think they are looking at other ways of raising funds.
It's funny that when we look back at how big a deal the Rule 42 was to open Croke Park initially, and just how easily they got that over the line yesterday.
Yeah, because it's
91%.
If you go back over, say, it's probably about a 15-year time frame. The GAA has probably changed more in that 15 years than the 100 years before that. Like the year on year, there's been radical changes in terms of structure of the championships and playing rules, in the ban on security forces in the north and opening up Croke Park, and this change, the way the GPA is now bankrolled by the GAA, etc. Like it's for a conservative organisation or an organisation whose image has been very conservative. It's changing at a dramatic pace, So, and nobody knows its future direction because of that, I think.
Okay, that's probably about it from Congress. This afternoon, Ireland and Italy taking on each other in Rome. There was one piece this afternoon. We'll get to Johnny Sexton in a few minutes. He's been talking to the Sunday papers, but before we do that, David Nucifora, who is, I suppose, the man behind the scenes in the IRFU, alongside Joe Schmidt, the performance director in the IRFU. He's been there for nearly 5 years now. There's a very interesting profile done by Rory Keane in the Mail on Sunday on David Nucifora. And it just goes back to how the IRFU has changed in the last 15 years or so. Like, it starts out talking, Warren Gatland used to dread Friday nights when he was Ireland head coach many years ago. It wasn't due to late night nerves on the eve of a big game. It was because he would have to sit down with a batch of IRFU committee men and explain his plans for the following afternoon. You'd go in on a Friday and there would be someone from the committee and they would ask, what's your game plan tomorrow? Are you playing a rucking or a continuity game? I don't even understand that question. He would then be summoned to the IRFU headquarters in Ballsbridge the following Wednesday afternoon for a debrief, more lectures and more unsolicited advice from Blazers in from a bygone era. It's just a very interesting profile, I suppose, the work that Nucifora has done, and he's very much been doing the background work behind Joe Schmidt with the player recruitment, the player development, and ensuring now that going into a World Cup in 2019, the pool of players is so much greater than it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, well, without a doubt, and it's it's not it's not very glamorous work or very sexy work, but it's very important, and like it's interesting how highly rated he is. I didn't realise this, that he's been tipped as the next Australia coach after Michael Cheika, and Brendan Canning is quoted here, the former Aussie hooker, saying Rugby Australia should be mortgaged in the bank and the house to get Nucifora back, to allow him to implement carte blanche, free rein, a centralised system. And there is a lot of people in rugby worldwide who really admire the Irish system, that Ireland have got it right with the centralised contracts, with the way players are managed, that effectively Joe Schmidt and Nucifora decide when the players play for their clubs.
Even this week, Rassie Erasmus has announced that they're going to be putting that in place from next season.
Yeah.
That they're going to be doing away with they have a 30 cap rule, I think it is, that they can pick players outside of. But I think they're putting forward quite a lot of centralised contracts for their players to bring them home and to ensure they stay at home. And it's no surprise that Rassie Erasmus is only, a year out of Ireland.
Yeah.
And he's bringing this idea to them.
Well, it clearly works, because if the Ireland players were playing as much as English or French players will be playing, there's no way they would have won as much as they've won under Joe Schmidt. Because you do look at the injury toll, we've had already, and if they were playing a lot more, like, where would you be? Like, it's interesting. Donal Lenihan wrote a piece a few months ago, and it was before the first Pro 14 game. And I think he used as an example, I think Ulster were playing Scarlets, but Ulster had 12 players injured for that game, and Scarlets had 13 injured. And that was at the start of the season. That was just after pre-season. It's why now, like, anybody who talks up to the World Cup, you're wasting your time, because you have no idea what team Joe Schmidt is going to be able to put on the pitch for the games that really matter. Like, things change so dramatically. Like, the Gatland stuff is interesting because of yesterday. I've been thinking about Gatland. Does Gatland get enough credit?
No.
It's amazing.
Certainly, not in Ireland. Not in Ireland.
Because I was just thinking about, like, when he got the Ireland job, he was their 5th coach in 6 years. Like, Ireland were a mess. Like, Brendan Fanning has a piece about. We'll get to it a minute ago about a famous trip to Italy, but. Like, Ireland beat France home and away on Gatland's watch. He was in many ways the most significant coach Ireland had, because he was the one that pushed them into professional era. They probably would have won a Grand Slam only for the foot and mouth broke up that season.
Yeah, they beat England and lost in Murrayfield. Yeah,
it disrupted the momentum then because of foot and mouth break. But when he went to Wasps, then Wasps were bottom of the table when he went to Wasps. They won 3 premierships in a row with him and a Heineken Cup. He went to Waikato in New Zealand, then won a provincial championship. We've seen what he's done with the Lions. I think he's there 8 or 9 years with Wales, won 2 Grand Slams, taking them 2 World Cup semi-finals. If you look at their group, they're looking at a semi-final again.
Yeah, it's very much on the cards.
And they're unbeaten in a year since Ireland beat them. And he's done this with a few different Wales teams. Like, if you look at personnel, it's changed dramatically.
And you still have the Warren Ball jibes.
And also, very important, Neil, well, at provincial level, the Wales teams are pushovers.
Yeah.
So what he's getting out of the players is way ahead of what their provincial coaches are getting.
Even this week, he took on Eddie Jones, often seen as the master of mind games.
Yeah.
And you could see, very arguably, Warren Gatland won that and continued to pile it on in the aftermath of yesterday's win. Like he made his comments about Kyle Sinclair earlier in the week, an emotional time bomb. And when push came to shove yesterday, Kyle Sinclair gave away a few crucial penalties.
And it very much was a time bomb, because he was playing brilliantly up until that point. I think he was top of the tackle counts.
Yeah.
He was having an absolute blinder of a game.
Yeah.
And then
And then you could see...
Then that time bomb went off.
And it clearly rankled with Eddie Jones, because afterwards, Gatland kind of rode back a little bit on his comments, and he kind of, had a bit of praise for Kyle Sinclair. And when Eddie Jones was asked about it, he said, well, I didn't realise Warren was a clinical psychologist. Maybe I should go and see him myself. So, he won the battle on that front as well this week.
But big calls tend to pay off with him. Like, one of the reasons he gets a lot of grief here was obviously when he dropped Brian O'Driscoll for the final Lions test. Yeah. But they ended up winning it, so that's what he has to say. Everybody won the test.
His masterstroke yesterday. I mean, obviously, people questioned whether Gareth Anscombe was the man to start the match, but when Dan Biggar came on, 20 minutes, the game very much on the line, and you could make a very compelling case that Dan Biggar was man of the match in the 20 minutes. Just on the basis of 20 minutes, completely changed the game.
To go back to this News of Four piece, there's some very interesting bits, I suppose, on how he's had to be the bad guy. He's ultimately the man signing off on any transfers coming in out of the Irish provinces. Like, for example, when the Australian first arrived, key positions across the provinces were being occupied by foreign players. Ruan Pienaar was Ulster's first choice scrum half. BJ Botha was Munster's go-to tight head. Most worryingly, Jimmy Gopperth was getting his game ahead of Ian Madigan at out for Leinster. Johnny Sexton's move to Racing 92 had left a void at number 10, but Matt O'Connor turned to the Kiwi to fill it. When Munster sought to sign Wallabies hooker Stephen Moore in 2015, it was reported that the IRFU had blocked the move. News Four would later deny that was the case, but the net result was the emergence of Niall Scannell as Munster's frontline hooker. There was uproar when Pienaar's contract was not renewed at Ulster, and John Cooney, a scrum half who'd failed to make an impression at Leinster and Connacht, was shipped up north in his place. Suffice to say, it worked out.
Yeah.
So he's been the bad guy on a few occasions now, and ultimately he's been proved right.
Yeah.
And this is the key, because we all have memories good enough to remember 2015 and how badly Ireland's depth was exposed when the injuries started to pile up. And these are the decisions that you need to take. And I think this is one of the areas where News of Four probably deserves the most credit, because we talk about central contracts and player management, but the reality is that all of that was in place before he came along in 2014. And yes, he's managed to play that system, and he's managed to harness the power that he's been given at the head of that system with Joe Schmidt to really good effect. But this kind of stuff, in the kind of the chess pieces and the manipulation of players across provinces, and the spreading of the talent, and the reduction of the reliance on non-Irish qualified players, and the ability to get kind of young Irish players into those frontline positions has been absolutely crucial to the success. And that list of players that you list off, like Niall Scannell, Joey Carberry, John Cooney, Jordy Murphy, these are all lads that are now front and centre in Joe Schmidt's thoughts for Japan. And in a different world where they had stayed at their respective provinces at the time, would that be happening? Probably not.
Yeah, there's an interesting bit there about the IQ rugby programme.
Yeah, the Irish qualified.
Irish qualified rugby programme, which is headed by Joy Lydon, a former England Rugby League international. But as examples, Will Addison, Mike Haley, Billy Burns arrived via the Premiership. 3 talented players all came through the English system, but they're eligible through their ancestry. Addison and Burns worked out really well for Ulster, and Haley's now first choice fullback at Munster. That rugby is often accused of having a very narrow pool. There's very much focused on the traditional schools pathways, but Nusafora, it's gone beyond that. It's gone into the clubs. They're looking wherever they can get qualified players. And in a professional sport where you have ambition, you have to do that. You have to go after whatever you can get. And I think you don't see many slipping through the net now. You would ask questions about Simon Zebo, I think. Why has he been let slip out of the picture? Or they've been too strict on that, for example. But other than that, I don't think they've done too much wrong.
There was a time a couple of weeks ago where you could very compellingly add a Donncha Ryan to that list as well. There's an injury crisis in the second row, and one of our best is not being considered.
But then where you see the positives of it would be the player management and things like that. That last week on the break week, you had a lot of players going back over to France, going to England, playing Premiership or top 14 rugby. Finn Russell gets a concussion. Playing for Racing 92 when he should have had his feet up watching TV on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and he misses a Six Nations game. Whereas, someone like Johnny Sexton, someone like Conor Murray, they had their feet up last weekend.
Yeah, but it's interesting, because if you go back to the England-Ireland game, both England and Ireland went to Portugal for training camps before that game. But I think England went for 15 days or something. Ireland went for 5. So England
came back very late.
Yeah, Eddie Jones obviously insisted on because they don't get the same access to players, and the clubs do demand more of them. But you saw the results of that when he had time, was given more time with the players. But like we saw the impact on Sexton didn't play as well when he was playing in France. He didn't play as well for Ireland when he was playing in France. So you can see the IRFU's point of view too.
Yeah, and
you mentioned Sexton there, Neil. Like he was the man put forward for a lot of the Sunday papers this week as their feature interview, and this is one of the things. It's very interesting reading across all the papers, everybody kind of leads with Rory Keane in the Mail, Brendan Fanning in the Sindo, Peter O'Reilly in the Sunday Times. Everybody kind of leads with Sexton playing. The way he plays, his style of play, and how it leaves him so prone to
the hot topic for the last
to big
2 weeks.
hits. But one of the other elements that came up in the course of this conversation is what we've just been discussing. In light of Sean O'Brien's move to London Irish, whether Sexton's thoughts on the IRFU policy towards players, and just to read a few of the quotes, he said, "It was a shit show at times trying to get in for Ireland camps. Like last week, I wouldn't have been here if I was still in France. I was getting pulled. I hurt my thumb against England one year, and they wanted to keep me in Paris for the rest of the championship. So there was pulling and dragging. It was far from ideal. Not a good place to be in for either the player or the team." Now, he does loop around later on, and he talks about Sean O'Brien, and I think the question, reading between the lines here, the question was posed to him whether or not he'd be happy for a player like Sean O'Brien to be considered post his move to London Irish. And he kind of said, look, the players will play with whoever is there. Like, nobody begrudges Sean O'Brien doing what's best for him or his career, but the players will play with whoever is picked by the management. That's a management call. But I think it was just because he is the man probably with best insight. He's the only one that's really been allowed, because the policy, to the best of my knowledge, the policy wasn't firmly in place when he moved to Racing.
Yeah.
And it was only subsequent to that was put in place. So he's the only one really with insight in the last few years of what it's like to be outside the player management system and to be still allowed to play for Ireland. And it obviously, judging by what he has said there, it's not ideal.
Yeah, and I would take from all that as well from the last couple of years that they encountered so many difficulties while Sexton was away with the pulling and dragging, trying to get him available for camps and things like that. It probably just reinforced their view that we have to stick with players who are under the IRFU umbrella. And
there will always be, I feel, a pragmatism to it as well. And if we got to a World Cup with 3 or 4 second rows injured, would Donnacha Ryan be considered? Absolutely. But I think they will always have to be seen as the exception rather than the rule. Otherwise, you lose all of that kind of power and sway. Like at the moment, that's a key negotiating chip the IRFU have when it comes to talking about player contracts and talking about central contracts, is that they can say, well, look, we have been very upfront for the last number of seasons that if you are outside the system, you can't play international rugby. And I think, yes, there can be a drip of exceptions there, but it has to remain that way. Otherwise, the IRFU lose one of the key strengths that they have, one of the key negotiating chips they have.
Yeah. Should he be playing today?
I would say if Carberry was fit, I would probably be inclined to give Carberry a run.
Yeah,
I think Carberry picking up a hamstring injury decided it once and for all.
There was a very interesting piece with Ewan McKenna earlier in the week in The Independent. And it very much...
Rugby's safety kind of problems, isn't it?
Yeah, it very much ties in with the quotes that Johnny has given to the Sunday papers today on concussions and on the way he plays and on... Like, his attitude is very much, well, I just have to get up and get on with it. I'm not changing how I play my game. And, I think Ewan's piece was more focused on the concussion element of it and the safety element of it. And I think when you look at it, like, there's a couple of duties of protection. Like, there's the duty of protection that the referees have to the players on the pitch as it's going on. There's the duty of protection that management have to their players. But then there's also the duty of protection that someone like Johnny has to himself. And I think it's the interplay of all three of those things that... And it's sometimes what should really be simple and straightforward decisions a lot of the time, because we know, and the evidence is there, we know how serious this issue is, and it is the ticking time bomb, unfortunately, coming down the tracks for a lot of contact sports, not just rugby. And it's something that needs to be treated with the utmost of seriousness.
Yeah, like it's I'm surprised he's playing today, even allowing for the Carberry thing, because he has had concussion issues before. He went off with a head injury assessment in the last game, and no matter what, they're going to beat Italy today. I think they just have far too much quality for them, and I think like he talks here about, he's asked about being targeted, and like you play rugby, Neil, out halves are always targeted, but he does get special treatment. Like
he certainly gets it a bit more than others.
Yeah, he does. But I think O'Gara got a fair bit of it as well. Like, to be honest, like I don't know if you remember, go back to the 2009 Grand Slam game. I remember, I think Gatland actually brought this up before, or was stirring it up about how they'd focus on O'Gara. And very early on, I think it was Wyn Jones hit him really late, and Donegal Callan was in very quick to defend O'Gara, to stand up for O'Gara. But he's getting a lot of this now, and there's people talk about the way he has his head down, and I've heard this about Ryan McHugh in Gaelic football, Donegal, that he gets a lot of concussions because his head down as well. But it's very hard to change your way of playing. Like if you've always run in a certain way, and there's nothing you can do. You can go to the gym to work and everything else, but you can't do anything in a gym to protect your head. Yeah. And these players are all guinea pigs, because nobody actually knows the impact till 20 or 30 years' time. Because that's what we've seen with American football. Like, it's the guys from the past that we've seen the effects it's having. But professional rugby is still relatively new sport, so we don't really know what impact all the hits and even look at the language around it. People should be a bit more careful about smashing people, etc. Yeah. The way people are being smashed could have serious repercussions.
And this is kind of where the duty of care, because Johnny Sexton will tell you that his game is to carry the ball as flat to the advantage line as possible, to hold it and hold it and hold it until the very last minute, until the defender is committed on him, and then when the defender has no other option but to take him out, that then he will release the ball, and that is what creates the space.
And the scary thing is, it's precisely how Ireland scored a try against Scotland.
And that was it. And Alan Dell hit Sexton so hard that it was frightening. Even in real time, it was frightening. As Jacob Stockwell was streaking down the other end of the pitch, it was frightening how hard that collision was. And I think Johnny Sexton, he will continue to take those decisions. He's been very clear, he's not going to change the way he plays. So if he feels that is to his advantage, he will put his body on the line. And I think that's the point at which, the protection, he has to be protected from himself in a number of ways, because if he thinks that that's what's going to give him the advantage, then he's going to keep doing it. Yeah.
One other story before we move on from the rugby. We briefly mentioned it there, Kieran. Brendan Fanning writing about back in the days when Ireland and Italy wasn't the game it is today. 1995, and just a fairly interesting trip down memory lane.
It is, I read a piece yesterday, because we always naturally focus on the Sunday papers here, but often the Saturday papers are stronger now than Sunday papers, because they effectively...
We'll change the review day, will we?
Yeah, and because they have to do the kind of job of a Sunday papers, they're more a feature-y based, and online as well. Yeah. Because I never mentioned in here, and I will just say it because Niall is here. They have the best young writer in Gavin Cooney, now recruited him in the last... He's the best young fellow I've seen in 15 years. He's outstanding. But he's coming into an media environment now that's really uncertain, and I hope it goes well for him. But I think I do get sometimes a little bit tired. The same people are mentioned here all the time. Yeah. And there's a lot of good writers out there that deserve credit too. But that's a digression. Actually, Brendan doesn't get mentioned enough, I think, in here. And to me, Brendan is the most knowledgeable rugby writer around. He's a qualified coach, he's a decent coach, and I think that often shows in his pieces. But he also writes with humour, and he wrote the best book about Irish rugby, I think, from there
the oral history,
from there to here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that was the English book, the Tom English one. From there to here, basically tells the story about how Irish rugby went from the amateur era to the professional era. But the stories from the early days are just... Like Joe Schmidt would have 3 heart attacks if he had one day like that. Yeah. Because Gary Doyle wrote about this in the Times of London yesterday. He talked to, because Ireland lost to Italy 3 years in a row, and Gary talked to Dennis Hickey, David Corkery, Paddy Johns, and somebody else about it. And there's great stories about it. But this story in particular was about where did I find it?
Game in Italy in 1995.
Yeah.
It links it. Well, what it ties in is with a couple of years ago, Ireland Scotland. The bus was late, and the fallout is still going on. Joe Schmidt still brings it up in press conferences about a bus being, what was it, maybe 15, 20 minutes late or something.
Yeah.
Compared to this, it is, it's nothing.
No, like, and it's like all sorts of things went wrong, and not just the bus. The bus didn't turn up. Noel Murphy trying to who was the manager.
Yeah, I've a few paragraphs here to read out.
Yeah.
Indeed, it would be small beer compared to perhaps the most calamitous day in our Test history. It goes back to the days when the locals were emerging fast as a very tidy rugby team, while Ireland were disappearing with similar speed. The jerking round started with the hotel forgetting to include the IRFU president on the accommodation list. Next, and a good deal more important, was the wretched state and location of the training pitch assigned to the Ireland squad for the pre-test session. It was basically a loosely ploughed field, all part of the grand Italian plan. On match day, the ace in the hole, the team bus didn't turn up. The 10 or 15 minutes delay in arriving at Murrayfield in 2017 was nothing compared to the stress levels in 1995 of team manager Noel Murphy trying to rustle up enough cabs to get his players to Stadio Monego. He ended up frantically flagging a few down on the road. By the time they actually got to the stadium, they were dog late, and in a panic, they asked referee Tony Spreadbury to put back the game. No chance. Italy beat them out the gate. By morning, we were greeted with an interesting little showdown at reception where Noel Murphy was having a conniption over the bar bill he'd just been handed. Current IRFU CEO Philip Brown, then Union Secretary, suggested that maybe it was the press who'd waited in behind the bar. No, Philip. The night porter was summoned. His description of the culprit who had liberated so much liquor was sufficiently accurate for Murphy to settle the bill on the spot.
Yeah. I know there's all sorts of great lines. Like there's one there... as we departed the scene, the lasting memory was of Ulster's David Tweed, a big man with very little to recommend him holding court. And Davy Tweed later became a DUP councillor. That says a bit about him. But it just, like, things where, like, I referenced it earlier, like, Gatland was Ireland's 5th coach in 6 years.
Yeah.
Like, rugby in the 90s, like, Ireland went 10 years without beating Scotland, you know, at the time.
Yeah, like, I grew up thinking Ireland were terrible at rugby.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrible.
Yeah, but they were.
They were, yeah.
That's why you did there.
I wasn't being misled on anything, you know. But
yeah, completely different. And I think the framing it in the context of the meticulous attention to detail now that Joe Schmidt has in organising his team, I think it just shows just how far the game has come.
We're going to move on from rugby now because Man United Liverpool, the big game of the day this afternoon. Yeah. Oh no, I don't get into that. It's the worst argument on the planet.
No, not even an argument.
But anyway,
but it is. I have to say, I think it's the biggest United Liverpool game since the 1977 Cup final. Mm-hmm. Because back then the Cup final was a massive deal. Like they played the '96 Cup final, it wasn't such a big deal then because of where Liverpool were, but. For Liverpool to win the league, I really think they need to at least not lose this game and probably need to win it. And there's a lot at stake for United as well. If United win, it helps them big time in trying to get the top 4. It could play a huge part in Solskjaer getting the job. And also for United
massive
fans...
dent in Liverpool's title.
Stop in Liverpool, yeah. I know even though City would win, the City are their rivals, their biggest rivals are Liverpool. Like going back to Alex Ferguson... saying its biggest achievement was knocking Liverpool off their perch. Like both clubs are obsessed with each other because it's actually thinking, I'll stay off social media today. Because when they play each other, particularly when the stakes are so high,
it's awful.
It's toxic. It's really just, you know, both sides, there's so much.
I think it was Philip Egan in the office the other day. He said, Liverpool and Man United, that's the day where you go into your house, you close the curtains and turn off your phone and watch the match. You don't want to be around anyone.
I don't want to look at Twitter during that.
You endure it as opposed to enjoying it.
Yeah. But the most interesting piece around the game, I thought, was the interview with Gini Wijnaldum with Oliver Holt in the Mail. And he has been, I know it's a cliche, but he's the player you notice when he's not there. Yeah. Because he makes such a big difference to Liverpool's midfield. And when they signed Naby Keita and Fabinho, and they looked like they were going to sign Fekir, like a lot of people thought he would slip down the pecking order. But he's actually played more minutes in midfield this season than any other player, and he's been really important for them. And he didn't really know much about him. So it was quite interesting, his backstory. Like, there's an interesting story just from a few days ago that he was actually in Holland. Willem van Hanegem was one of the great Dutch players of the 70s. But he was having 6 years ago, Wijnaldum had an unhappy time at PSV Eindhoven, and Van Hanegem wrote a piece about him, defending him. And there was a birthday celebration, 75th birthday for Van Hanegem during the week, and Wijnaldum went over to it just to thank him, which is a really nice touch. He was brought up by his grandmother, and there's stuff there about he had to train so early in Rotterdam that the trams weren't running, and his grandmother used to walk for 45 minutes with him to training every morning to get him there. So he's very grateful to her. There's interesting stuff about, you mentioned this about FC20. Yeah, this is interesting.
It kind of ties into what you were saying there about how for Manchester United it's all about knocking Liverpool off the perch, and he kind of brings that story up himself. Is that Wijnaldum says that the only time will tell whether Liverpool possessed the nerve to outlast Manchester United, City and Spurs in the title race, and he also understands how desperate United fans are to stop Liverpool winning the league. I know exactly how they feel, he says. I played at Feyenoord, and the year that FC Twente became the champions, it was getting near to the end of the season, and it was close between them and Ajax, and we had a game against Twente. Training is open to the fans in Holland, and the day before we played, we were warming up when 50 of our fans came onto the pitch. They said, "It's not going to happen tomorrow." They wanted us to lose to Twente to stop Ajax overtaking them at the top. We were playing for 4th place, but all they cared about was not helping Ajax. It's the same with Manchester United and Liverpool.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that there's a player saying that.
Yeah.
Because
there's a real
we've been talking about it for weeks, and everyone's saying, "Oh, isn't it? It's bloody disgraceful that these Man United fans want to stop Liverpool winning the league more than Man City, etc., etc." But you know, the player is the same as any fan. He knows the story.
And that's it. And I think there was a really, like, I think that's such an inbuilt part of being a fan of any sport, is that the Schadenfreude is almost as valuable to you sometimes as the actual winning of a trophy, and that, you know, the need to see your team stop a rival is, yes, even for Manchester United, who they are in a very strong place to challenge for fourth place in the Champions League spots anyway. But today is not really about that. Today is all about who's on the other side of the fence, and I just think that it is we know that it's not unusual, and we know, I think maybe the only surprising thing is, given that it's City, just how overwhelming that I've seen it said a few times, if you were to ask 100 United fans who they want to see win the league this year, 95 of them would tell you City.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the only surprising thing, is that the strength of feeling goes so far in that direction, but maybe it's naivety on my part to be surprised in the first place. But Wijnaldum, like, it's a great piece, and it covers great ground. I think the one thing I've heard, the player of the year conversation has started to start up in recent weeks, and I think if you were to pick a Liverpool player at the moment, like, the obvious candidate is Virgil van Dijk, and he is typically seen as Liverpool's front runner if they're going to have a contender to be player of the year this season. And it feeds into the Wijnaldum unsung hero thing, and his quotes there are interesting. He just says, "I've heard people say that phrase, unsung hero, about my role, and maybe that's true, but it's not a problem for me. I know how my teammates think about me, and I know how the manager thinks about me, and they really appreciate me. They don't see me how people outside the club see me. I feel I'm loved by the other players and the manager, and that's more important." And I think that encapsulates a lot. Like, he probably is an unsung hero, and, you know, we always use the phrase unseen work or whatever, but you know,
it's probably the last few months that I think a lot of the fans are really starting to appreciate him. Yeah. As you mentioned earlier on, you appreciate him more when he's not there.
Yeah. No, he does give them something different in midfield, because Henderson and Milner would be quite similar, but Wijnaldum is just a bit more to his bow, I think. The other piece that jumped out at me on the United Liverpool was a piece by Jim White. It's in the Sunday Independent, originally from the Telegraph, and I think it's interesting because I think this is something that will ultimately cost Liverpool, and is one of the reasons why they won't win the title. Is
so you think they won't?
No, I think City will win by probably 4 in the end, 4 or 5. But I think part of it, even though Liverpool will get more points than they've ever got before. Their record is 86. They might get about close, a bit more than that. But emotion becomes a factor. Like we saw that in 2014, and the emotion is fueled by desperation. Like if you've ever been to Liverpool, it's a city that's both obsessed and haunted by its past. Like there's stuff about Liverpool Football Club everywhere, stuff about the Beatles, the Slavery Museum at the docks, and that does start to take its toll. Like it's interesting if you look at the two their two most significant title challenges since the last one. At 2009 was the 30th anniversary of, 20th anniversary of Hillsborough, and 2014 was 25th anniversary of Hillsborough. And that was the 30th anniversary of Hillsborough this year, and there's a Hillsborough trial going on at the moment. But that stuff kind of feeds in, because it's bringing up stuff from the past. It's saying this would be a great year to honour the victims, etc. But this makes the comparison, like, people forget the pressure there was on United to win. Like, United went 26 years without winning the title. And there's a reference here by Jim White to Alex Ferguson's first press conference as manager after Ron Atkinson was sacked and replaced him. The second question to him was, can you be the man to deliver the title? And Brian McClare, was one of those guys in the early years when there was huge pressure on them, and he said eventually they learned it's not about playing fantastic football, it's about just sneaking over the line and just getting the wins. And like, Liverpool in 2019 haven't played fantastic football other than Bournemouth game. But like December they were playing brilliant stuff. But now this is when the pressure on and you have to nick games. And I think they're finding it hard because every game is huge for them now. Every single
one is the biggest yet.
Yeah. And it's the biggest in 29 years,
and I've noticed this, it seems the vast majority of Irish sports journalists all seem to be Liverpool fans, but I'd noticed it on Twitter that a game 6 months ago, I'll see all the usual Irish Liverpool fan journalists out there, and 6 months ago they'll be talking about how, Bournemouth at home, whatever, for example, the last game they would have played, easy, that should be fine, 3 or 4-0. And coming up to the Bournemouth game a couple of weeks ago, I saw the same people all of a sudden going, I'm really not feeling good about this. I think we'll struggle to break them down. I think this and that.
But I think part of it, just very quickly,
it's just the title race getting in on top of them and
sucking them up. But I think part of it, and I think this applies to the players and as well as fans. I think nobody expected a Liverpool title challenge. Like, until City slipped up, even though they had this great start to the season, but City lost 3 and 4 games, and it suddenly opened up for them. Up till then, they were kind of hanging on by their fingernails. So both fans and the players had to get used to this situation where we have a real chance. And I think that it's kind of clear they don't have the squad to do it. Origi was the first attacking sub, or the attacking sub brought on against Bayern Munich, and it's just... Whereas United, even though United have had problems, their plan B is often Mata, Lukaku and Sanchez. They still have more depth in a lot of positions.
Just reading this piece earlier reminded me of a piece, it's a while ago now, it was actually written, Rory Smith wrote for the New York Times just after the Liverpool-Arsenal game back at the end of December. And just a quote from that it kind of struck me is, it's easily forgotten amid all of the hyperbole and artifice and tailored tension that surround the Premier League, but the whole purpose of the enterprise is for people to have fun. If it's in some way unbecoming to enjoy being on the top of the table, it's hard to know what the point is. And I guess that's the counterbalance to the weight of history that sits on Liverpool. And you saw it probably most obviously in the Leicester game a couple of weeks ago when Anfield seemed like a bag of nerves. And it really did seem that now, whatever about having fun when things are going well, now is the time when the atmosphere in the ground will really seep down and kind of impinge on the players even more. And if you ask anybody who supports any team, you'd much rather be the dog in the fight than the dog on the outside looking in. And that's what it's all about for Liverpool and for City now. Like Spurs, yes, they're probably still harbour maybe some faint hopes. After yesterday now, it seems like their chances probably slipped away. But, for Liverpool and City, yes, the weight of history, yes, it's a huge amount of pressure, and that is ultimately what you have to overcome. But, Liverpool, how many, we're talking about title challenges in 2009, 2014 there. So does that, there hasn't really been in 27 or 26 out of the other 29 seasons. There hasn't even been a title challenge to speak of.
Yeah, and it's funny, if you go back to the 2009 one, they beat United 4-1 at Old Trafford. And they got the record amount of points, 86 points, and they still finished 4 behind United. Because they're up against an incredible team, an incredible manager, and that's the same thing again. Like, what City have done, City's got 100 points last year, they'll probably get over 90 this time. Generally you wouldn't. The average to win the championship is 81 to 82. 82 would still have won City the championship last year. So that's why Liverpool, people will throw it at Klopp and say you're Bottler, or, if they fall short. But they might get a tally that would win virtually every other season. But it's like they've lost one game, and it's nearly March. They've lost one game, and they're still second favourites. So that shows you.
We're running out of time. We probably need to wrap things up in the next couple of minutes. Before we do, though, any other little pieces you want to flag to the viewers?
There's one point I'd like to make is I think it's very I think partly because you've Ireland Italy today and you've Liverpool United today and you've Dublin Mayo last night or whatever, but there's a very narrow focus in the papers today. It's basically all soccer, rugby, GAA, and you've the European Indoor Athletics Championships start in Glasgow on Friday. And it's one of the strongest teams Ireland has sent there in a long time. Mark English, Thomas Barr, Phil Healy, Kieran McGeehan, they're all in really good form. And there's a lot of the younger athletes with great stories as well. And I think, like, if you look under the auspices of Sport Ireland, there's 73 different national governing bodies in Irish sport. There's a lot of stories out there. And often in the media, the focus is far too narrow. Yeah. Like 3 sports just have taken 90% of the coverage in those papers.
It's disappointing as well. Like last night, the National Elite Senior Championships boxing were on in the stadium, and I know it's probably an unfortunate circumstance of time, but you have some great stories coming out of that. Like there are 11 fighters crowned national senior champion for the first time. You have stories like a young lad like Gabriel Dawson, 19 years old, middleweight champion, probably going to be one of Ireland's leading hopes to qualify for the Tokyo Olympics next summer. Like could be one of our real stars of boxing in the coming years, someone who's thought really highly of. And unfortunately, because it was on a Saturday night and because deadlines in Dublin and Mayo maybe took a little bit more precedence, that you had, I think it's 3 pars in the Sunday Independent and maybe 8 or 9 pars in the Sunday Times, and that's about the extent of the coverage we've seen of the National Elite Championships today. It's unfortunate, really.
Okay, guys, that's probably all we have time for this afternoon. You can join us again at 1 o'clock in about 15 minutes' time. We'll have live coverage of Manchester United against Liverpool. Until then, though, we'll see you then.